In the ongoing fallout from the Grenfell Tower fire tragedy, the London Assembly has found that so-called Waking Watch patrols are costing Londoners who live in buildings identified as fire risks due to the current cladding crisis £16,000 an hour. Guy Lynn has more.
It's called a Waking Watch. Wardens on patrol in buildings yet to have unsafe cladding removed, who alert residents if there's a fire.
Initial costs that we were asked to pay were about 120,000.
Natalia's paying for a Waking Watch at her building, where flammable cladding similar to that in the Grenfell fire is being taken down.
I can use this money elsewhere. I'm not having a job at the moment. I pay a lot of money. I can use them somewhere else for my personal own use. I find it really unfair that I've not been even consulted to pay those costs.
And she's not alone. Same story here in Thamesmead.
We have expanded polystyrene cladding, and that is considered so dangerous that they recommended we install 10 Waking Watch operatives to search 24/7 for fires, basically.
Analysis by the London Assembly found that so-called Waking Watches are costing London residents £16,000 an hour, which works out at £12 million a month, or £145 million per year.
I think the reason we're paying more is that there are more tall buildings, and obviously the tall buildings are more expensive than lower buildings. And I think obviously the costs of hiring anybody in London are going to be higher than they are in the rest of the country.
The government says the London Assembly figures are wrong, and there is financial support for Waking Watches. Waking Watches came in after the Grenfell tragedy, where 72 people lost their lives. So this is about leaving nothing to chance. For many, though, there's just no end in sight to have to keep paying for something so expensive in already tough times.
Well, Andrew, to you first on this. Why are Londoners having to pay a third more than the rest of the country for these Waking Watches?
Well, they shouldn't be, quite clearly. Look, we welcome, I think everybody welcomes the Housing Secretary's announcement of covering the costs of cladding for those buildings above 18 metres. But the government does need to go further. You know, it's not the fault through the failure of leaseholders that they are bearing these additional costs. It's the failure of regulation. And it is not reasonable for leaseholders to be asked to pay. So I must say I will be calling on the government to go much further and to cover the cost, not just of the Waking Watch, but also of the building work that needs to take place to make those buildings safe.
So do you think the government are dragging their feet over this? Why is it taking so long?
Yeah, that's a constant criticism of all government, but the extra £3.5 billion that they've announced has shown that the government is willing to move towards resolving this crisis. We're just asking for more.
Can you make sense of this 18-metre threshold?
Yes, it was originally a planning, a building control criteria for the safety of cladding on buildings. The reasoning was that if you're only less than 18 metres high in a building, then it's easier to exit, whereas obviously it's much more difficult to exit from taller buildings. But one of the things we've also got to ask ourselves is why we're still building tower blocks, why we're still building this typology of buildings that not only has proved to be less safe than more traditional low-rise developments, but also they're less efficient. And yet the mayor is putting application after application after application in to trap more people in the leasehold hell that so many Londoners have felt over the past few years.
Rupa, you were shaking your head. Andrew has admitted the government needs to do more, go further.
Yeah, they do. I mean, it seems that this is just a piecemeal, more bits of billions being chucked on. First of all, they were going to do it for only one type of cladding, ACM, but not the other one, HPL. First, they were going to do it only for social housing. Now, you know, it's actually because of Labour putting the pressure on with our opposition days that we've got this far. But I think we need a comprehensive solution for all, because as you pointed out, 72 people burned in their beds at Grenfell Tower. Shameful thing, one of the richest boroughs in one of the richest countries on earth. And that should not have been in vain. And this 18-metre rule is completely nonsensical. I did a straw poll of people from my blocks yesterday. It's a fund, can I point out as well. It's not automatically these people will be remediated. So one person in a block said, I just don't believe it. I don't believe it at all. Because it's a fund that their housing association will have to bid in for. And it's not just cladding on blocks. There are loads of other issues, things like insulation, faulty cavity wall stuff, timber balconies. They're also fire hazards that have been identified. And if you think about it, at the end of 2019, there was a horrible fire at Richmond House in Worcester Park in Sutton. That was only 4 stories. Didn't stop the fact that when the fire brigade arrived 9 minutes after the call, the whole thing was burnt to the ground. Still, 60 people, including loads of children, not been rehoused from that. So I think we need a comprehensive thing. We said, didn't we, never again. And we're just making the same mistakes, you know, a few quid here and there. I think we need a proper reassessment of how big is the problem, because this new amount added to the old amount is not going to cover every single building in the whole country. So we need
It isn't, Rupa, but the Community Secretary has said, or the Housing Secretary has said, that those living in properties under 80 metres will get so-called affordable loans.
I mean, again, that's just insult to injury. These people are paying a mortgage or paying rent as it is. And then on top of that, for an indefinite period, a loan. I mean, as the Tory MP Stephen McPartland said, it's a kick in the guts. The RIBA, the Royal Institution of British Architects, are not socialist work or anything crazy. They have said that it massively underestimates the problem. So, I mean, this piecemeal bits and pieces here and there is not enough. You need a comprehensive strategy. And I'm afraid it is a building regulation failure, as Andrew said. If the building regs allowed it, then that meant that these sort of developers will do whatever they can on the cheap, because you can make fire retardant cladding as well, but they put a cheap solution in. I think government initially has to fork out for this, and then maybe they can go after developers. But I mean, the thing is, when you have a sort of lax regulation system, and when you say health and safety is meddlesome and troubling and annoying, that's what you get. People do it in the cheapest way.
I hope, therefore, Rupa, you'll join with me in opposing all new residential tower blocks, the kind of which has just been passed in Ealing, for example. Will you join with me and oppose these residential towers that are just building up problems?
Just very briefly, Rupa, just very briefly, we do need to move on.
You need to look at them on a case-by-case basis, but I'm an anti-densification person. It doesn't fit the character. Then densification.
We'll, of course, move on to this issue in the coming weeks and months, no doubt.